Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer, and my guest this week is Eliza Mata Delian, affectionately known as Mata. The person who helped me set this up sent me a little biographical sketch about her. She is a modern-day mystic, internationally acclaimed master healer, and spiritual teacher. She's like a human X-ray machine who, with razor-sharp accuracy, is able to see through the layers of people's unconscious, read the repressed thoughts, emotions, and belief patterns in the body that cause their pain, fears, and suffering, and help transform what's unconscious in the person into consciousness. Combining this unique gift with her experience of enlightenment at age 33 and her deep wisdom excuse me, the cat walked across, her deep wisdom and compassion for human suffering, Mata devised a light-speed healing system known as the Delian Method for health and consciousness. This groundbreaking self-healing system helps to quickly identify and permanently erase the self-sabotaging imprints from the body's cellular memory and transform fear, pain, and suffering into health and self-empowered consciousness. Spiritually, the Delian method spontaneously assists the individual in awakening their inner intelligence and discovering their inner truth, creativity, and life purpose. And Mata has written a book entitled In Search of the Miraculous, Healing into Consciousness. And a lot of our discussion today will be derived from things she's talked about in that book. For instance, she has a chapter towards the end of the book, which is a very fascinating account of her personal journey. So we're going to go into that to some extent, and then discuss a number of other points that are in the book. And of course, I'll be linking to all this from batgap.com, so people listening can find it all later on. So thanks for doing this. It's really a joy to see you. I haven't read your book cover to cover because I do an interview a week when I can't always read a book a week, but I've read quite a bit of it and really enjoyed what I've read so far. It's a keeper.
Good to be with you. And actually, before we start, I want to say that I love the name that you used, Buddha at the gas pump. It's so perfect.
Oh, thank you.
Because it's exactly what the new Buddha is like.
That's the implication. Yep.
Yes.
And I can't take credit for thinking up the name. A young friend of mine thought it up when I was trying to think of what to call this show. A fellow named Isaac Nevis. So all praise to Isaac. Good. So you were born in Armenia, as it said in the book, and you've had a number of challenging things happen to you in life. Some jobs that were really killer jobs. So, I never would have survived, and some various other things, but also some really marvelous spiritual adventures and experiences and unfoldments. So let's discuss that. I know you've told these stories many times, and you wrote it all in the book, but let's go through it in as much detail as you think is appropriate for this format, and I'm sure I'll have some questions and comments perhaps as you go along.
So, well, the first thing is to, of course, talk about the beginning of life. And the beginning of life is very, very significant and important for all of us because it creates the imprint to how our perception of the world is going to be like. And beginning from the very beginning, my experience coming into the world was not a very pleasant one, in a sense that I went back in my memory and remembered after I was born, and remembered how I was put in a crib with many other children who were crying, and the neon lights shining on the whole night and day, and feeling like I needed to sleep and the lights were not allowing me. And so the conclusion I made about humans, that obviously the adults, that they don't understand, they're not sensitive, and they have no clue what they're doing because we're all here and they're not connecting with our needs. So that was sort of like the beginning of life. And if I go back to just prior to birth, that was another significant moment, which is, Buddha says, that is the most traumatic experience of our life.
Getting born,
the process of birth. And I remember being in my mother's womb and feeling like I'm being pushed out. And in that time of very important time where you're being pushed out and you have to obviously be born, I was resisting because obviously womb is such a beautiful place. You don't have to do anything. It's like paradise. And then I realized that I have no choice. It's not up to me.
What if you're born
And
by cesarean? Does it make a difference in terms of that trauma?
I think it would definitely make a difference.
Mm.
Yes, yes. In a way, that's a completely different story
Mm.
because then you don't have any choice
Right.
at all.
Yeah.
But in the case of being born, you can either continue resisting, or in my case, I thought, okay, well, I understand that I cannot continue resisting because it's against it's against my own will.
Mm.
Whatever's happening, I cannot control, so I might as well surrender. And what helped me to surrender is remembering the earth. I felt like I knew this place before. I was here before, and it's a beautiful place. And I remembered the trees and the sun and the blue sky. And I thought, okay, it's not so bad. I can come back into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was born in a state of surrender in a way. And that's been pretty much my whole life has been surrendering. And in a way, when I look back, there's that initial resistance, of course, which comes from the ego, and then you realize, well, this is the ego, and then you surrender, and that for me it happens very quickly. Of course, that also helped me on my journey to experience the thing we call enlightenment. So coming back into the process of birth, I don't know if I'm taking too long to describe
Take
this.
as much time as you like. It's fine.
But I think it's important for people to understand this.
Sure. Yeah.
And of course, once we're born, then the first impression, other than, coming into the world and seeing how the world welcomes you, then it's the family. Of course, this is where we learn all our conditionings, the imprints, and we make conclusion, and our belief system starts being cultivated at a very young age. And my impression of my parents and people around was same as that what I had in a hospital when I felt people are they don't know what they're doing, and I could sense that nobody's going to really understand me until I was about five years old. And I had an experience where my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, died of cancer, and I saw him die. And in that commotion where my mother and my aunt were trying to help him, and he was on morphine for a long time, and he basically couldn't handle the pain any longer. So he went for the bottle and he started drinking from the bottle, and they were hectic. They didn't know what to do, but he just knew what he wanted. It was enough suffering. So, and he very quickly went. He died very quickly. And my the immediate reaction was fear. Mm. And because somebody was moving and suddenly he's not moving any longer. And then I remember sleeping at night in the next room, and my mother and I were visiting my grandfather's house, so we were there. And I started thinking, what will happen to a person who's dying? And I sort of looked at my own mortality, and I thought, I'm going to die one day as well. And then who am I? Where am I going to go when I die? And what is my purpose here? Those were very, very important questions.
This is when you're 5 years old.
5 years old.
That's great, because most people go through their whole lives without asking those questions. You were asking them at 5.
Exactly. But again, what we bring into this life also matters. I've been on this planet for too many lifetimes. So I guess I've learned many lessons in those lifetimes to be able to start asking that early on.
Sure.
And so that was very significant and very profound, because there was a sense of disidentification from the ego, disidentification from the attachments to life. And that's the main challenge challenge of any spiritual seeker to disidentify with life and our attachments.
Right.
So after that, I had another significant experience at the age 7 where my parents were divorced, and I was put in a room with my grandma because she came to take care of me. And at that time, I was really puzzled with her. Every night before going to sleep, she would sit in her bed and start praying, and she would just, mumble things, which to me, just whispering something. And I thought, this is really strange. What is she talking about? What is she praying to? So one day I challenged her, and I said, there is no God, because I felt like she's praying to God. And I said, there is no God. If there is God, show him to me. And I was very feisty with her and was running around. She finally grabbed a hold of me, and she said, looking into my eyes, she said, God is within you. God is within every human being, every animal, tree. God is everywhere around you.
You had a wise grandmother.
She was very wise. And that, for a young child, children know. That's my experience. Children know the truth. And for me, it was like, yep, she's telling me the truth, so I'm going to leave you alone. And then I loved the time I spent with my grandmother. It was very nourishing, very very pleasant in the sense that it was a state of complete acceptance. Grandparents are more in that state than our parents. And she was completely present. So I experienced presence, I experienced acceptance, I experienced unconditional love with my grandmother. And that was very important because later on, my life didn't turn out so pleasant because my father remarried and my stepmother was a very angry woman. So my life became a little harder. And sort of like when I look at the Cinderella story.
I was just thinking Cinderella.
So it was like that. I had to help with the household chores. When I was 9, I had to do some shopping for the family. Do the washing. So I didn't have childhood. I basically was, and my intelligence knew that my survival is depending on these people. And I can't take care of myself. I can't just walk out, so I have to do what they tell me. And every child knows that. And every child learns to compromise. And this is how, because of children's intelligence, they also learn how to lie. They learn how to manipulate. So we all do that because we have to learn to survive.
Yeah.
So in my case, because of my experience with my grandmother and my grandfather, there was no need for me to manipulate or to lie, but I knew I had to do what they asked me to do because I can't take care of myself. So after that, when I was 16, I rebelled like every teenager rebels. And at that point, my mother kept asking me to go live with her, so I did. I decided I've had enough of this. And my stepmother was very, very abusive as well, physically and mentally. So that was the freedom. That was like, now the world is my oyster. I can do whatever I want. And of course, I always had a very keen interest in education. And that was something my grandmother instilled in me as well. She said, no matter what happens in life, education is the most important thing. So do whatever you can in school, study well, university. And she used to tell me also about languages. She said, learn as many languages as you can, because every language you learn, you become more as a human.
How many did you learn?
Well, at the time, my mother tongue was Armenian, and I went to Russian school because at the time my father asked me. That's the only thing he honored when he asked me, which school do you want to go to? And I was born in Armenia, which was part of USSR,
right.
And there was a choice of Armenian school or Russian school, and I said I'd like to go to Russian school.
So you learned Russian.
To Russian school, so I learned the Russian, And those were the two languages basically used there. And when I immigrated to Canada, I was in Montreal, so I started learning French. And of course, English I started learning when my first university I went to was languages. So I was going to be an English language teacher. And though it did not really, I loved teaching, but there was my artistic side wanted something more. So then I went and studied architecture. And my mind, which is I like scientific exploration, initially I wanted to study cybernetics, but I didn't because I'm immigrated to Canada. And so
what is cybernetics?
well, it's more, I think the science, mathematics, physics, and the science of how things work.
Oh, okay.
So, and I would, if I had the choice now, I would definitely follow quantum physics because that's what comes closest to truth.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, because everything really spiritually, if we look at, once we have that spiritual experience, it's exactly the same as what quantum physics comes to start to explain scientifically. So when I immigrated to Canada, I was 24, and I came with an attitude that unless something is very clearly presented to me that makes sense to my intelligence, I'm not going to buy anything. Basically, it's okay, you have to appeal to my intelligence, just like with my grandmother. She appealed to my intelligence. She told me the truth. So when I moved here, I met this a Russian woman who was she was part of the Second World War, and after Germans retreated, she was taken with them and then eventually immigrated to Canada. So I met her, and she gave me this book to read by P.D. Uspensky, In Search of the Miraculous. And when I read the book and I read about the teachings of Gurdjieff, I was so excited because I felt like finally I have some kind of guidance, because all my life I had no guidance whatsoever. I had to figure out things by myself. My father was busy with my stepmother and his work. My stepmother was busy with her issues. So basically I had to figure out everything on my own. And this one, again, appealed to me in a sense that, yes, I want to explore. Now I'm excited. And soon after, she gave me another book by, oh yeah, I read books on life after death. So, kind of dabbled, whatever library she had, I was borrowing and reading. And then she gave me a book by Osho, and that was called Beware of Socialism.
Huh.
And of course, coming from a socialist or communist country, I was curious to why. I know that communism is just an idea because I don't see it's really happening, even though I lived in that country. So that totally blew my mind, because everything he said about socialism and capitalism and the differences, and how true communism can only come out of the very rich country such as America, that was, those were new ideas, but at the same time it made sense to me, because when people don't have enough, how can they share? How can they live in that communal way without really feeling that, oh, I need more for myself?
Right.
Because the true communism, the idea of communism, which came from Karl Marx, is that life is for everyone and we share it in a way. It's a more, I would say, socially, the idea of communism is in a way the idea of when you realize that I'm not separate.
Yeah. So it's nice in principle, but if people are living in a state of lack, then it's not going to happen, both spiritually and materially. If they're in a state of emptiness or insufficiency, then there's never going to be that overflowing that would actually make such an ideal practicable.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyways, to make the story short, I started meditating with his active meditations, and of course went to visit him as well. And that was the beginning of my internal search. And as I described in the book, when I was on my search and meditating and in that community that Osho created, again, I felt like I belonged, but I didn't belong at the same time.
How so?
Well, I belonged in a sense that there was an enlightened mystic who was sharing the truth that I resonated with, that I absolutely feel within myself. Every word I read wakes up the intelligence within me, and I go, oh my goodness, it's true. How come I never thought of this? But it just appeals to your inner intelligence. And in that sense, I felt absolutely I belonged because it's the energy field that an enlightened master creates that helps that personal search easier and take my to go into deeper areas, into more unconscious areas. And in another sense, I didn't belong because I felt that people who were there, they still had their social conditionings. They still had their issues of control. They still had their issues of insecurity. And the egos were there battling.
Yeah, I had to chuckle when I read that part of your book. You kind of broke it down in terms of power-hungry administrators, blind followers, and free thinkers, you know? And I've experienced a couple of different spiritual movements close hand, and it's I think you were spot on in terms of that analysis. It's just human mentality is such that people kind of sort themselves out into those rough categories, and there's always a similar dynamic going on. You know, there's different types.
Absolutely, because we're human.
Yeah, yeah.
And we bring our human nature, and everybody comes from a certain state of development that they bring into that relationship communally. So obviously some are younger spirits, they're still learning and they have their own issues. And not everybody, what I also discovered was that not everybody is really seriously interested about enlightenment or awakening.
Right.
People say they do, they gravitate to groups like that, but they gravitate because they feel good and they need a sense of belonging to a group.
Yeah.
Not they're really interested to wake up.
It might also be fair to say that you know, different groups as a whole have different degrees of spiritual maturity. For instance, you might say Jonestown was a very immature kind of scene, whereas others are much more spiritually mature, and you're not going to find the sort of egregious examples of abuse and whatnot, at least not to the same degree that you would find in the more immature ones. So it wouldn't be fair to lump them all into one big basket.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. And in this case, at least with the community that Osho created, there was the sense of individuality.
Hmm.
So
That was fostered and encouraged.
absolutely, absolutely, that was his main thing. You need to find your individuality because unless you find it, you're not going to be willing to let go of your ego.
Right. Yeah, I like that point. Maybe we'll after a little bit we'll kind of dwell on it more specifically. But the whole point of making the ego stronger and more healthy, as opposed to just from the start chopping it down. You know, I think that's a very important point. We could dwell on it even now if you like, and then kind of loop back to the story, or else we can pick it up a little bit later on.
Sure. I think I can probably tie the two together. Absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead. Let's elaborate on that then.
So in my case, I feel that I've always had a healthy ego in a sense that I didn't have internal insecurities. I felt that I'm capable of doing whatever I want to do. And this was also, of course, from my past life training. I've been with masters for many lifetimes, and I described that in the book. You probably read
I
that
did.
section
Yeah. Uh-huh.
with, and including the Buddha.
Right.
And so I come with some maturity. Uh, so I didn't have the insecurities that normally the ego, the wounded ego carries.
And that's for the sake of those who might be skeptical about that claim. I guess what you're saying is you've had kind of clear inner visions or intuitive kind of realizations of those lifetimes with those masters, right? That's how you know that you have been.
I had the memory, yes.
The memories, pretty vivid.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Memories came up, and the memories come up with also why do we need to remember past lives is in order to see the patterns that we're repeating this lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, what I saw, the pattern that I was repeating, basically, um, in the case when I was with the Buddha, I went to Buddha because I wanted to learn more about spirituality, but coming from a background where I was a rich person and I had everything and all the comforts, you come to a teacher who says, "Here's the begging bowl. You have to go and beg for your food."
Right.
It was very uncomfortable for me, even though everything the Buddha talked about was absolutely resonated as truth.
Yeah.
So what I struggled with, why do I have to use the begging bowl and go beg for food? You know, I
Right.
work for it and use my own labor. Probably I had some other, issues about that too. So then I left the Buddha and I went to become a fisherman. So I lived a very simple life, fishing and taking care of myself and enjoying the nature I was in. And when the Buddha died and the news reached me, I was so devastated. And I remember in that moment, I experienced that moment and realized that I missed the most important thing in life because all this beauty, the worldly beauty was nothing compared to the beauty of an enlightened man like a Buddha.
Mm.
And and I was so deeply distraught that in that moment I experienced hearing Buddha's voice saying, Charveti, Charveti, go on, go on. It's not
Uh-huh.
this too shall pass, so go on with your search. And that compassion, the Buddha's compassion is so profound. And in that compassion is what heals.
Yeah.
So in that moment, very deep sorrow and feeling his compassion, at the same time I felt that that's right, this is not the end.
Yeah. To me, that's a very comforting thought. If you can take the long view, you know, that our life is not confined by 80 times around the sun or whatever. It's a long process. Then you can. It doesn't make you lackadaisical, but on the other hand, it makes you patient and accepting of things as they present themselves. This too shall pass. There's a kind of a tolerance that develops when you can take that view.
Yes.
Yeah. Incidentally, on the past lives thing, a number of spiritual masters say, well, you shouldn't dwell on them or try to remember them or anything else. But then Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra says there's a time when you're going to remember them in your, yeah.
Because to me, from my experience, remembering past life, you need to remember, you need to see the patterns you're repeating. So
Hmm.
in this case, when I found Osho and I found that same quality of compassion, because I remember the first time I went and sat in assembly for 3 days in a row, I just cried for 2 hours, just looking at him, and he was saying nothing. He just looked at you and started crying, and I wouldn't stop crying. And I could feel that I've come home, but there was that sense of compassion again that really helped to heal something. And then I was really, one thing really, really bothered me the whole time I was with Osho was that I have to be next to him. I cannot leave. I have to absolutely be there because I cannot miss his death. And I was really puzzled. Why am I really so attached to having to be there when he dies? Remembering after he died, as a matter of fact, and I was there, I was right next, to in the burning ghats where they were burning his body, and I was there throughout the whole time. Afterwards, I had that experience of remembering my life with the Buddha. This is interesting.
Hmm.
And I understood why I was so attached to having to be there when Osho dies, because I had experienced a different situation with the Buddha where I was devastated and I cried and I was in that state of um, realizing that I missed
Right. Regret. Yeah.
the most important thing. So this way, once we remember something inside us, once we see the pattern, something inside us relaxes and it goes, aha, now I understand why I was so attached.
Yeah. That's good. And in fact, you tell the story in your book where you had committed suicide in one life when you were living in a Tibetan monastery, and then your mangled body, I guess, was brought up from the bottom of the cliff you had jumped off, and the master there told some disciple to kind of take care, bring you back, I think you said, and you realized that that disciple that was told that was Osho, actually.
So yes.
Yeah, that was interesting.
It is, and how we all, everything, nothing really ends, nothing finishes, everything is a continuation.
Yeah.
One lifetime is not enough to learn everything we need to learn.
It would be very scary and depressing if we didn't think that, in my opinion. I mean, I've thought that for so long that I'm used to it, but it seems to me that if you really thought that your existence was going to just totally end in a couple of decades or something, it would be terrifying.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You wouldn't have any chance to make mistakes and learn from your mistakes.
Right, and it also would say some kind of not so complimentary things about God, if that's the way God's running the universe, and what kind of a guy is he?
Yes.
So we were kind of dwelling on the point of developing the ego and strengthening it. In fact, there was a nice quote you said. You said, you can't make enlightenment happen, but you can prepare the vehicle.
That's right.
I like that.
That's right, because that's the only thing we can do. It's in our power. Mm-hmm. Enlightenment is a gift from the universe, and it happens when I say we're ready. It happens when we're ready. But what is that readiness? The readiness is we need to see the ego. We need to understand the ego, and we need to be willing to die. In other words, what is willing to die? It's that intelligence inside you that understands the fear is coming from the ego, even though initially it's an intellectual understanding that the fear is from the ego, and I will not die, I will continue. I hear all these stories, and there's life after death, but it's all intellectual.
It's conceptual, yeah.
Yeah. So to actually experience that fear in the body and to transcend it, it prepares you, that makes you worthy.
Yeah.
Of being the gift.
And would you agree that meditation, if it's deep, is a sort of a mini death, because you do transcend the ego, and if you do that thousands of times over the course of many years of practice, then you get very accustomed to just transcending the ego, and so you begin to, like, it really sort of defangs death.
Meditation is absolutely the key.
Yeah.
Because the way meditation prepares you is gives you an opportunity to experience the inner emptiness, and start making friends with that inner emptiness and not run away from it. And most people, all problems exist because people run away from their inner emptiness, which is their being. So if you run away from your being, how are you going to really find that eternal you that never dies? It's the being that never dies. It's that emptiness that never dies, and within it is the consciousness. So meditation helps you to prepares you to make friends with the emptiness. And not only that, once you sit and go deeper into emptiness, something starts expanding. Suddenly the limitations of the body start disappearing. And in that expansion, suddenly you move into the unknown. And this is how you surrender into the unknown, and you become one. This is enlightenment, surrendering into that unknown and merging with it, and there is no longer any I that comes with it. Yes, absolutely. Without meditation, it will be almost impossible to come to that place, or a place of recognition that I'm not my body, I'm not my pain, I'm not my thoughts, I'm not my emotions. I'm this inner emptiness. This is my being.
Why do you think it is that people run away from that inner emptiness, like you just said?
Oh, there's so many reasons. Fear is number one.
And the fear, there's a saying in the Upanishads, which I don't remember the Sanskrit, but it goes, certainly all fear is born of duality. And do you think that there's kind of a root fear that happens or that resides at some point that kind of keeps us in duality, and people are afraid to confront that, and that's why they run away from it, the emptiness?
Yes, the root of all the fears is the fear of death. Because in death, everything's going to disappear into nothingness, into emptiness.
Or so you think. Or maybe it will. I mean,
It will. It will. So somewhere the intelligence knows this is what's going to happen.
But people who have these NDEs, these near-death experiences, they describe it as being a wonderful fullness and a great, experience, rather than any kind of empty. Emptiness has a negative connotation.
Yes, but if we really look at the truth, the whole universe is existing within the emptiness. So whatever we see as a materialized form is only a part of that emptiness in the form, but the form sooner or later disappears. And the energy within the form goes back into that same emptiness. And one thing I'd like to say about near-death experiences, which I also had one, and the realization that I'm still here, I'm still present, going through the tunnel, and it's blissful, and I don't need to be afraid of anything. Yes, that realization is there, but it's still not the step of enlightenment, because enlightenment means understanding that even I am here, I am a presence, needs to go. Because thinking I'm eternal, I'm here, and even my body is dead, I'm not dead.
Right.
Still, there's something still lacking of me knowing that I'm not the I, you see. So there's another step past that.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Right. So most people, when they have these NDEs, even though they're free of the body, there's still kind of a localized entity that's having the experience, and they don't necessarily realize or cognize their universal nature. It's more like, oh, here, look at me, I'm looking down on my body, I can hear what the doctors are saying down the hall, things like that. But they're still they may be more abstract, but they're still individuated.
That's right. That's right.
I see.
That's right. So until the person starts recognizing the I as still part of the ego, then the absolute complete surrender into the universe is impossible. And why do we need to come to that ultimate surrender to the universe? Is because then you're all inclusive. You realize that you are not separate from anything or anyone.
Right.
And realize the I was simply keeping you in that state of still connected to your individuality. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I tell you, having read a number of these NDEs, it can definitely be a kick in the pants in terms of loosening up the confines or the constraints that ordinarily bind people. It can be a real life changer for many people.
Absolutely. That's why they're very important. And each person who experiences that, obviously in their own way, then comes back to share it. And this is what it's all about: education. Our life on the planet is education.
Yeah.
So people who've had experiences, they share their experiences to educate, help others to realize, oh, well, life is not just all, doom and gloom, and there's other things that I can look for, and I can strive for, and I can experience.
Yeah, but again, there are better ways than cancer and heart attacks and getting struck by lightning to have that realization. Obviously, meditation is a very effective way that doesn't nearly kill us when we practice it.
My experience is people don't like to work at it.
They don't like to they don't have the discipline, you mean, to do it?
They don't, because as a society, especially the Western culture, we're so trained collectively to get our problems fixed by somebody else.
Yeah. But in your case, of course, I mean, you never had a problem doing it, did you? You were drawn to it like a duck to water, and you really enjoyed it.
Yeah, but you have to keep in mind that background, I was used to doing things for myself. And in a way, my spirit chose to come to the family that I came to, so that nobody interferes with my journey, so that I can decide what I want to do. So I'm very, even in Osho's community, I had to do my own thing. And many
Right.
times I was called a troublemaker because I wouldn't fit in to what I was told. I had to do my own thing.
Yeah.
So, so that's sort of yeah, plus coming from the socialist communist sort of background country where religion wasn't really imposed. But coming into the West, I see that the West is very much, and normally people are very much wanting somebody else to take care of them and do the work. So
Hmm.
people don't like to do the dirty work. They just want somebody else to come and do it for them. And that's why they don't have the experiences, and the strengthening of the spirit does not happen, because you need to become a warrior in order to face those things like fear and insecurity and you know, be able to see that I am the master of my life. Otherwise, everybody else is the master, and I'm a poor victim who is not being loved and, you know, being criticized and being rejected. And then people thrive on that, because feeling like a victim is also like a drug. When
Yeah.
somebody feeling like a victim, they need that drug, they need the attention from others. So it's like no wonder we have all the vampire movies, so, and people are so attracted to them, because we live in a society which is pretty much um, living in that vampire state. Everybody's wanting attention from everybody else, and very few are there who are willing to give
Hmm.
the attention. Or if they're giving it, it's a negative attention in a sense. It feeds that insecurity and feeds that need within a person. My way is very different. I don't like to feed people's needs. I'd like to transform. You know, I'd like to transform their insecurities and their wounded ego.
Yeah, it's interesting to see what happens to some celebrities when they get a superabundance of attention, but they don't have the kind of inner strength and maturity to handle it. And then they go off the rails. You know, they're all kinds of crazy problems, just because. And that kind of is an illustration that attention isn't going to do it for you necessarily.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Let's loop back to the Osho community for a bit. You, I thought you, in a very kind of honest and mature way, you brought up a lot of the observations of the Osho community that people like myself had from the outside, and cleared up a lot of doubts. I thought, like it wasn't necessarily this big sex orgy going on, and even the Rolls Royce thing. I've interviewed about, I don't know, half a dozen people who were in that community, and had some pretty good explanations about the Rolls Royces. I mean, even one person even said, well, it was, people would donate these things, and then he'd ride around in them a bit, and then be able to sell them, and it would, for even more than retail value, and it would help to support the community, help to support the ashram. So that, I can live with that. Were there any other things that you think that, people might be thinking about Osho if they were, had an outsider's perspective that you'd like to address?
Well, I think any person such as Osho, any awakened person who, one thing that puts Osho apart, all the other awakened people that I know, is his ability to be gutsy and do his,
Do his thing.
yes,
Right.
and that's the role. That's the actually illustration of a very important mystic, such as the Buddha, who shakes the foundation of the old. Because unless we shake the foundation, we cannot build anything. Unless we destroy the rotten foundation, we cannot build anything. And he was disliked very much because people wouldn't understand the conditionings that they were slave to. And this is the difficulty when a master like that comes into the world, that he shakes your foundation, and unless he challenges your intelligence, and unless you really sincere in wanting to wake up, you don't see these things. And obviously, the criticism is inevitable, and media, we know media thrives on stories, and
Right.
media thrives on creating stories.
Right. And controversies and whatnot.
And whether they're true or not, that's not the point.
Hmm.
And now we're seeing that in that time, in the 80s, it was less obvious.
Yeah.
Now, because of YouTube, because of internet, it's more obvious how things are manipulated, how politics is manipulated, how people are manipulated, because there's more and more people are speaking out. But in those days, there was, I think he was a single person against that big collective unconsciousness that was speaking. And it started in India, of course, with the whole sex issue. And when somebody says, well, you're all repressed, which is the truth,
Right.
Indian community is very sexually repressed.
Hmm.
And so he speaks to a crowd of 100,000 people and telling them that they were repressed. And what is sex? It's the first chakra. It's the life force where your life force is sitting. And if that chakra is repressed, if your life force is repressed, forget about enlightenment. How is the energy going to go up to your, third eye or a crown and ultimately open up like a lotus flower to the universe if you have a lid on your own energy? So that's what created the controversy, because of that repression. If sex was not repressed, the cultures that are not sexually repressed embraced the idea.
Yeah, although I mean, in the West, we've since the '60s had a sexual revolution, and you could hardly call many people in the West repressed. In a sense, they've gone to the other extreme, but that doesn't seem to have been conducive to enlightenment either. So there must be some kind of middle ground or happy medium or something.
Yes, but we need to understand, first of all, the roots of sexual repression. They all come back to religion, they all come back to religious organizations.
Right.
Because a child learns from his parents, her parents, that sex is taboo. And when you see, I remember with myself, you see a couple kissing, well, you look the other way. You're not allowed to look at it.
Yeah.
Children have that conditioning. Even in the West, it's now breaking down. It has been breaking down, but still, religion will not allow it to be completely broken down. If we look at the conditionings that come from religious leaders, the Pope, and Christianity, for example, it's still, contraceptives are not allowed, abortions are not allowed. So people's freedom is taken away to decide how they want to live their life. So these things are still prematurely, prominently there, especially amongst the young people as well.
Hmm.
So the people that you speak of are very few in between. People who realize and understand that I need to transcend, I need to explore, first of all, in order to transcend.
Hmm. So in summary, then, Osho's community wasn't some kind of big orgy going on, but it wasn't a repressive, stifling kind of atmosphere either. There was some kind of normalcy, some sort of balance, naturalness that had been achieved there.
Absolutely, absolutely. You had complete freedom,
Hmm.
sexual freedom, and what I experienced with myself, and I was young when I went there, and most people were young, and still young people get attracted to Osho for some reason, is that I was when we're young, we're open to explore our sexuality. But then, as I explored my sexuality, I also realized the conditionings. Even though I grew up in a communist country, my parents came from the West. So they still had their sexual inhibitions, the conditionings about sexuality. And I realized that those, even though I didn't think they were in my body, those conditionings were in my body that had passed on from my parents.
Huh.
And I saw that they were coming, they were even deeper, even from my previous lifetimes, being in the Christian environment and being in, and there's many people, including myself, who have been, following the Christian faith. I remember some past lives in that religion as well, which I hadn't written in the book, but also remembering how I had to break out because what is taught there is about the heart, but the energy cannot come to your heart if you repress your sexuality. And when you repress your sexuality, as we see now, it becomes a perversion. And there's so many cases of child sexual abuse within the clergy. And why is that happening? Because you cannot repress something that is natural. And this is what Osho was trying to say to people, that if you want to heal as a nation, if you want to heal your pain, if you want to heal and really enjoy and live and celebrate life, which is our birthright, you have to break through those conditionings. You have to see the root, where they come from. And of course, institutions, the status quo is never for the individual.
Right.
That's institutions.
Was Osho himself sexually active, or was he kind of beyond that?
There was a time when this was in Oregon. He had a press conference that he invited many people, and this is when he came out of his silence. And there was a question: "What about your sexuality? Are you sexually, can you talk about your sexuality?" And what he said was really interesting and made me think. He said, when Buddha was asked the same question, his answer to that question was, "That question is like my closed fist."
I don't understand the answer.
Let me continue.
Okay.
Closed fist, in other words, he didn't want to talk about it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And Osho said, that was Buddha's answer, but my answer is, my fist is open. Mm-hmm. I can tell you that, yes, I've been sexually active, but in the past few months I've been, my body hasn't been strong enough, so I could not really pursue. So therefore, and he made a joke out of that. Mm-hmm. Because when you look at an awakened person, doesn't mean sex stops. You're still living in the physical body.
Right.
And I can say from my own experience, if my body does not, there's a point that comes, you are indifferent about it. And this is what happened to many Osho disciples. When they went into it full-heartedly, experienced it full-heartedly, and understood what they need to understand and break through some of the conditionings they had to break through, such as myself, then you come to a point of neutrality about it. Mm. If it's there, it's happening, you enjoy it. If it's not there, you don't think about it, you don't crave it, you don't dwell on it. So you're free of that instinct that the body is generating, because it's a natural instinct. And when the body is young, obviously, what is sex? There's another a beautiful man, a teacher, who passed away, I think, some years ago, Barry Long. He talks, you probably heard of Barry Long. He talks about, have you? I don't know.
I do. I'm not familiar with him, but I've heard his name, yeah.
Australian teacher.
Australian?
Yes. And he talks about sex very beautifully, and he says sex helps to rejuvenate energy, to move energy through the body, and helps you to dissolve the ego, at least temporarily. Because in that union, in that act of sexuality, your ego disappears. You suddenly are experiencing something that allows your whole body to move, your energy to move through your whole body. And as the energy moves, then you come to see things, because energy is understanding. Once the energy starts moving, and once you experience the full body orgasm, which not so many people come to experience, then you suddenly have a moment of absolute dropping of the ego and melting with the universe. So sex has been also a very profound teaching in the form of Tantra in Tibet.
Right.
So to make sex dirty, as Christian religion has done, is very damaging for a possibility of human flowering, because even the From Sex to Superconsciousness, Osho has a book called From Sex to Superconsciousness, to demonstrate that it's something that is given by the existence, by God, and we cannot deny what's given by God and then expect to meet God face to face and say, thy will be done.
Huh. Interesting. Of course, there's some factions of Eastern spirituality which, say, well, it's not rejuvenating, it's draining, and if you conserve that energy, then it gets converted to ojas and goes up through the sushumna and all that business. So I don't know, I'm no expert, but there seem to be these conflicting schools of thought, out there.
Well, that's in yoga, they do that as well.
Maybe that's a yogic tradition, yeah.
Tradition, and yes, you can. So,
I'm sorry, your voice cut out there. You can what? Did you say?
Will yourself. Will.
Right.
Through will, you can do those things, because yoga is very much a tradition of cultivating that will. Through will, you can do anything. You can be buried on the ground and be there for days. Yoga knows how to do those things. But is it natural? Is it how existence made us? Is it only to create life that sex is all about? I mean, there's so much openness about sex now than it was 20 years ago, when or 30 years ago, when Osho actually started bringing those concepts out.
I think another consideration is, what a person is suited for, because there obviously have been examples of great sages and mystics and so on who lived celibate lifestyles and that did not appear to be an impediment to their enlightenment. They became highly realized, but what percentage of humanity is qualified to do that? It must be very, very small. So you can't emulate those people necessarily. You have to be true to yourself, right?
Absolutely, it's a matter of choice, definitely. But in my view, life provides me with opportunities to experience whatever it provides me to experience. I am going to experience it. I'm not going to cut myself off from experiencing anything, because only through experience is how I become a knower. So
couldn't somebody misinterpret that though and become hedonistic? Somebody's offering me this marijuana, I think I'll experience that, and here's a whiskey, I think I'll experience that. You can kind of experience all kinds of things that might actually degrade your consciousness or intelligence.
If your goal is to wake up, and if your focus is, I'm going to experience and I'm going to watch what my experience is going to teach me, if that's your attitude, then absolutely not. You can, when I was in my 30s, I was given a marijuana to try. People invited me to a party. I tried, nothing happened to me, because my meditation has been deeper than what that plant can offer me.
I see.
So if my meditation supersedes that quality of the plant, and why was that plant put on this planet? In order to give people an experience that something divine is there, that something more to life than what you think life is all about. So everything on the planet is there to give people an experience that there's something more to life than what you think.
Yeah, good point. In fact, Ayurveda says that every single plant and substance is a medicine for somebody. Even if it's poisonous or whatever, and for most people there might be a specific purpose for that thing that would be beneficial to somebody.
Or the natives, they use mushrooms, and they have, and in traditional sort of native culture, when you go on a vision quest and you use the mushrooms, you just use them for the experience.
Right.
But if you get hooked on it, that's a different story. If you get addicted to something, that's a different story. That means that your awareness is not strong enough, Your resolve about your self-discovery is not strong enough. You're more searching the experience now. And this is the difficulty. And why are you searching the experience? This is where the person needs to start looking at what is the experience helping you to forget? What is the pain inside you? What is the insecurity that this experience is helping you to forget? That's why people get addicted to drugs, because
Yeah.
they're trying to forget something.
Huh. Interesting. So, yeah, I had this when I was 17. I did drugs for about a year, and I kind of was telling myself that I was using them to explore and open up to deeper awareness and so on and so forth. But I kind of progressively deteriorated, and until after about a year, I was paranoid, and I dropped out of high school, and I was all foggy and confused. And I just sat down one night and I thought to myself, if you think this is some kind of spiritual quest that you're doing here, you're kidding yourself, and you better turn it around. And so I learned meditation and turned it around and all. But I guess the principle we're discussing here is that one man's meat is another man's poison, and we, anything has its purpose, but anything can also be used in excess and abused, and can become a weakening influence rather than an opening influence.
It can, but then in your case, you had to do it for as long as you did in order to come to that awareness. If
Yeah,
you if you hadn't done it, you might have never come to meditation.
it's probably true. I mean, it really opened my eyes about some things, and when it was done, it was done. Yeah, I mean that's a good attitude in general in life, isn't it? To kind of see the past as having been what it was supposed to be because it brought you to the present.
Absolutely. And some teachers like Gurdjieff, he actually even used to make his disciples drink
Uh-huh.
till they fall into the unconscious. They couldn't drink anymore. He used to make them eat till they can't eat anymore, so that those things that are hidden in their unconscious can quickly surface.
Mm.
And he would see what is really hiding, because we hide so much stuff in our unconscious. And once those things are seen, come to consciousness, then you can easily see them, transform them, and move through them. So this is exactly what my method does too, without having to, get a person.
One thing I've observed is, is that of the several world famous great masters that I have come in contact with, um, they're still human beings very much. I mean, they still have human frailties, at least from my point of view. Which might be perceived, which critics might jump on as, you know, um, points of contention that, well, they're phonies, or they're really not all they're cracked up to be, and so on. But I don't know. I've kind of learned to be forgiving of those things, and to appreciate, to take what you need and leave the rest, and to appreciate the great gifts and blessings that they've bestowed on my life and on the world. Do you kind of feel that way, or do you look back on Osho as having been infallible and beyond reproach in all respects and so on?
You know, the first thing that popped to my mind, there was a question asked of Alan Watts, and Alan Watts is, he's an American.
Sure.
He used that, and the question was, you say that you're enlightened and you're still drinking. How's that possible? And he said, yes, but I drink in an enlightened way.
That's funny.
So what it is of course a person is still a person. The personality is still there. The main difference is that you're not identified with it.
You're not identified with it.
That's all there is, because learning does not stop. If somebody's become enlightened, doesn't mean they stop learning.
Right.
And
Or
it
or
doesn't.
possibly making mistakes and learning from those.
Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that suddenly they're not a human being anymore.
Right.
Because they're still a human being. They still have their needs. They still have to eat. They still have to go to the bathroom. They still have to, those things don't change. And what we bring in terms of the personalities that we bring into this life and adopt from our parents, those things don't change. So
Right. Some things seem to change. I mean, your personality can really get quite transformed by a spiritual awakening, but maybe some things don't change.
Some things don't change because they're just in built in your body. They're in the DNA.
Hmm.
But what changes is your perception of reality, your perception of people. What changes is that you stop judging, you stop criticizing. What changes is that you become compassionate and understanding. What changes is that you understand what's happening to this person is also happening to me. You understand that the duality is there. I live in the world of duality, but I'm not of the world. So this is the saying, I'm in the world, but not of the world.
Right.
What
Jesus
changes?
said that.
That's right. So this is all about a perception. So nothing really in life is separate. And if the sun is shining, obviously you feel more energized and you feel I can go out and I feel more happy being in my form. And when it's cold, in my case, I don't like rain anymore because my body's getting old and I need a sunny environment. So you realize, okay, I need to change an environment. So, and yes, what are the frailties? What are the frailties? When we judge and say it's a frailty, then we're judging and we're separating.
Well, there is a tendency for people to kind of idealize their teacher, put them up on a pedestal. And in some cases, there's a tendency for teachers to encourage that or to try to hide their warts, and portray themselves as being some glorious, perfect thing.
Case then that teacher is still hasn't transcended the ego. Because, if I was just recently in Minneapolis doing a workshop, and somebody was giving me compliments, and it doesn't touch me because you might be giving me compliments one moment, and you might turn around and start judging me the next moment. I know human nature. So nothing really, I don't get affected by either judgment, criticism, or by compliment.
Would you say that on some level, on a more superficial level, as Mata, if someone is yelling and swearing at you, that's unpleasant, and if someone is praising you, that's pleasant. But on a deeper level, it doesn't matter one way or the other. Would that be a fair assessment?
That's right, obviously. And then I have a choice. If somebody's attacking, then I have a choice to say, well, sorry, this is not allowed.
Yeah, or I'm out of here, or whatever, you're out of here.
Exactly. So and if obviously if somebody's more pleasant, then they're open, because how can you as a teacher share something if somebody's closed and is attacking you? It's impossible for sharing to happen, and it happened to me many times. I'm doing a talk and I would get people sitting right in front of me. Some person is completely open and listening and absorbing what I'm saying, and another person is sitting there in judgment in everything I say. So when I look at a person who is open, new things come out of my mouth, and I can talk, things that I would have not talked normally. And the person who is closed, nothing goes. Energy doesn't move. So there's nothing I have to say. I cannot say anything.
It's very true. There's a saying that a teacher's like a reservoir, and you can put a little drinking straw up to a reservoir, not much is going to come through, or you could put a great big pipe and a lot is going to come through. So it's the receptivity of the student that determines what the teacher's actually going to be able to say and do. Yeah. So if you had to boil the definition of enlightenment down to one thing, would it be what you said a minute ago, that it's freedom from identification? Is that the kind of the essential characteristic of it?
Well, that's one of the characteristics, absolutely. The term enlightenment was coined by the Buddha, and the reason he called it enlightenment, because his experience was that his whole body turned into light. That was exactly my experience, where
when you were 33.
Yes, when the body turned into light, and in that experience, realization that the whole universe is made of joy. And once you realize that the universe is made of joy, and joy which arises out of creation, then you understand that everything in the universe that has a material form has arisen out of that joy of creation. And And then you realize on a smaller scale that you are the universe who is also creating moment to moment. And the moment you stop creating, then you become like a black hole. Mm. Then nothing happens, nothing moves, nothing's seen. And light arises out of creation. So in that creation, in that joy, there's also light and there's also consciousness.
So when you had that experience when you were 33, was that a watershed moment, which things were never the same since, or did it kind of fade and get back to normalcy again?
Like any other experience, that experience also fades. What does not fade is consciousness. So once you become conscious of something, experience allows you to have an awareness of something. So once you become aware and conscious of whatever you're becoming aware of, that never fades.
So since that experience at the age of 33, there has been a level or a degree of consciousness which wasn't there before, and that has not faded since then. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
In your book, when you mentioned when you had that experience, you began to find that consciousness was awake even while you were asleep. So it was 24 hours a day. Did that fade, or is that still a characteristic of your experience?
It's still there. There's an awareness in my sleep that I'm aware. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm aware in my sleep, and then there's the alpha sleep that we come to once in a while. There's the deep sleep, mm-hmm. And Buddha described nirvana as that state of deep sleep, where suddenly there's nothing, not even consciousness.
So now, when you're in lighter stages of sleep, you have the inner awareness, but when you go into the deepest stages of sleep, then it's just nothing.
There's nobody experiencing or being, there's nothing. Okay.
I read the reason I bring this up is that a number of people have asked me to ask my guests this question, because there's a certain school of thought that maintaining inner awareness during sleep is the acid test of awakening or enlightenment, and that a person might think they're awake, but if they conk out totally when they're asleep, then there's something yet to be developed. So that's why I brought it up. And I read an interesting account recently by a saint who lived in Rishikesh named Tatwala Baba, and someone asked him if he slept, and he said, what would happen to the universe if I slept? In other words, he was identifying with that sort of universal consciousness, which is the foundation of the universe, which you were referring to a minute ago, as everything arises out of that joyful state. So he identified with that so completely and the implication was that no, even that awareness of that wasn't lost during his deepest sleep. At least that was my interpretation of it.
That's correct. The awareness of the universe. You need that alpha sleep where there's nothing happening, no conscious, like the awareness of I'm conscious that I'm sleeping. You need the deeper state where nothing happens in order for your body to rejuvenate. Otherwise, you cannot rejuvenate.
Right.
Survive. I have an interesting story about that.
Sure, please.
I was driving back. There were 4 of us in a van, and we were driving back from Oregon back to Montreal, and we were passing through Chicago, and it was wintertime. And as we're going on a highway, 3 o'clock in the morning, so the 2 of us were sleeping on the back in the van, and because it was converted, like you can actually lay down to sleep. 2 people were driving, and suddenly in my sleep, I became aware that there was a dangerous situation and I might be dying.
The driver was falling asleep or something?
What had happened, so I'm asleep, the person next to me is asleep, and what was happening, they hit black ice and they turned. In that moment of their turning and they're going down the ditch, I suddenly became aware death might happen. And obviously, I wasn't awake. I didn't see nothing that happened. And as I was becoming aware, I felt, okay, let me start accepting death because it might happen. And as I'm accepting death, person next to me started screaming. He was asleep too.
Huh.
And he just started screaming, ah, ah, ah. And as he's screaming, as the van going down the ditch, I'm saying to him, it's like, stop shouting, you're disturbing my acceptance of death. All this is happening without words.
Oh,
And
I see.
we're asleep.
Ah,
And as the van went down, it was maybe, quite a deep ditch that we went into. And so it went down and it stopped. As it stopped, that's when we woke up in a way. Well, I was awake in a sense, but then the man was still screaming. And later on, we realized that when he was a child, his mother had a car accident.
oh,
And that memory was being triggered for him. That
interesting.
was screaming. And for me, I'm just accepting my death. And the interesting thing is once one person is in that state of calmness, somehow things work. And what happened, we just went high, didn't even wait there for 5 minutes. There was a police car and there was a tow truck pulling another car about 50 meters away out of the ditch. So we were back on the road in no time.
That's great. Good thing you lived. Um, this leads into a discussion of witnessing, I think, because you talk a lot about witnessing, and I want to understand more clearly what you mean by it. I have my own concepts about it from my own learning and experience, but I want to make sure we're on the same page, and maybe we could just explore. Like one question I might have to start with is, do you see that there are sort of degrees or levels of witnessing? There could be kind of a little bit of witnessing and then deeper witnessing and so on.
Absolutely.
Let's riff on that a little bit.
Well, witnessing is something that initially, when a person starts meditating, they have no idea what witnessing is because they haven't been able to disidentify with anything. They're just trying to watch their breath. Many times people even go, the question is, well, how do I watch my breath? So once they start watching their breath, once they start seeing the breath coming in and out, which is the key in meditation, then the moment comes where you start suddenly, you jump out of you thinking that I am my thoughts. When you can see a thought, you can see a breath, you can see it's happening on its own, then your witnessing starts strengthening. You start cultivating the witness by watching. So as you watch, as you observe, the more you observe, the more you watch, the more distance is created between you, the witness, and what you're observing. And in that distance, the distance becomes bigger as the witness becomes stronger. That's why meditation has to be a regular practice. And if it's done only once here and once there, it's hard to create that environment where you can cultivate and strengthen your witness. And it has to be strong enough where you can actually witness any situation. Because if you're practicing witnessing, like there is a story with Wallace Black Elk. And the story is when he was out in the mountains trying to find red rock for his pipe, suddenly he saw a rattlesnake, a big rattlesnake. And the snake, so he knew if he right there by his foot, and he knew if he makes a move, he might get bitten. So that would be the end of his life. So he stopped and he froze and he didn't move. And in that time of not moving, the snake started climbing his leg. So he climbed his leg, climbed up his arm, went around his neck, and just stood there. So it could have just, choked him to death if he squeezed himself, right? So he just waited and he watched. He wouldn't move. And in that state of being a warrior, you have to be a warrior for that to happen. Then the snake suddenly uncoiled himself and went out through the other arm, out through the leg, and it just left. So this to tell you that fear debilitates. So when we're fear, we get attacked. This is how animals attack. If you're afraid, if you look at cheetahs run, right, after their prey. The moment the prey turns around and goes against the cheetah, faces the cheetah, cheetah runs away.
Yeah.
You see? So fear and in human life is the same thing. We get manipulated because we're afraid. The moment we stop being afraid, we cannot be manipulated.
Of course, some fear is very visceral and instinctive. I mean, if you were to put me in a cage with a hungry lion, I don't think I would be free from fear. I would, probably my heart would beat hard, and I would, I wouldn't just, it wouldn't be like I was sitting there reading a book or something. There would be a very different physiological reaction.
The body has a built-in fear, that's right. But then your consciousness supersedes that. And this is exactly the fear that we need to feel. We need to go through for the experience of enlightenment to happen. We need to transcend the fear that is inbuilt in the body. That's instinctual fear.
Yeah. So I imagine if I were in a cage with a hungry lion, there would be the fear, but, there would be a degree of witnessing which wouldn't be touched by the fear based on my general experience in life. And which would be a heck of a lot more than it would have been 40 years ago if I were in a similar circumstance, because there hadn't been much of a witness developed.
It's not any different from when in native tradition, when you're hunting an animal, animal knows at some point the animal knows that I'm going to be killed, and there's a sense of surrender.
Yeah.
Because there's a knowingness that surrendering circumstance, and there's a knowingness that I'm not necessarily giving my body for somebody else to survive, but there's a knowingness of that. And in that state, there's no trauma.
Right, I see. So coming back to witnessing again, witnessing, the very word implies a duality or separation. Something over here is witnessing something over there. There's an observer and an observed. So what is the observer in witnessing as you define it? What is the component in the personality or whatever that witnesses?
It's your consciousness that's witnessing it. And once you witness something as separate from you, and as J. Krishnamurti said, the observer becomes the observed and realize that it's not separate any longer, that's where you transcend any kind of duality.
So when you, for instance, are aware during sleep, that you could say is a form of witnessing, because consciousness is awake to itself even though the body is asleep.
That's right. That's
okay.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty much my understanding of it. Because sometimes witnessing, and that's not volitional. I mean, you're not trying to do anything while you're asleep to make that happen. It's just happening spontaneously.
It's happening spontaneously because you've cultivated enough witness within you to watch what's happening.
Right. Would you agree with this? That if we think of the full range of creation, there's sort of the absolute pure consciousness, and then there's all the relative phenomenon. And if you could, and there's from one level of appreciation, there's a distinction between those. One is non-changing and silent, and the other is active and changing. And if you could open your awareness to that full range, there's naturally going to be witnessing, because you're going to incorporate within your experience the distinction between those two fields. Does that jibe with your experience?
The witnessing is not naturally happening. You need to cultivate it.
Exactly. I totally agree. The vast majority of people have not cultivated it, but when you have, it's not something like you have to pay attention to all day long. It's just spontaneous.
That's the goal. The goal is for you to actually be in a witnessing state 24 hours a day.
Exactly. Good. Well, this might be a good segue into talking about the Delian method, because we're talking about having to cultivate it, and that seems, from what I understand, that is the primary thing you've come up with for helping people cultivate this. So what is it? Tell us about it.
Well, the method does more than just cultivate a witness. First of all, in order to cultivate the witness, we need to see where the identifications are. And one easy way, the method basically, it arose not because I was looking to create any method. It just happened on its own, spontaneously. And I did take an energy healing course, a 2 weeks course. This was in 1995. And in that course, I reconnected with the ability I had as a child to read thought forms in the energy. So, and what that means is that the body, the energy, is imprinted with many repressed thoughts, beliefs, conditionings, which prevent from our witnessing or disidentification from happening. So that's like clouds that cover the sun.
They keep us bound or identified.
Exactly. And
Right.
not only that, as I started exploring this gift and this method of healing, I realized that it was not complete. And then I started exploring how can I make this in a way more complete, in a sense that go into the problem, the cause of the problem, because there's so many layers to it till we get there. Go straight into the cause of the problem and release or transform the belief and the imprint from the body cellular memory. So as I started using the known methods such as Gestalt and some energy, such as counseling, talking about the energy or talking about what I see, I realized this is not enough. The person is not really getting it. Their consciousness is not coming on. And I could be talking and for forever, and very little change is going to happen. So I decided I'm going to ask the person to verbalize those thought forms that I was seeing, hearing in their energy. And the moment the person started doing that, verbalizing them out loud, suddenly I could see the energy started to move and other thought forms from the unconscious started coming up. And as I started helping them to verbalize those thought forms, because all I was doing was just mirroring what I see and doing that through the whole body, not just in local area. Immediately, I was stunned to see that chronic pain was instantly disappearing permanently. Illnesses, asthma, thyroid, Crohn's disease, fibromyalgia, many illnesses that I worked with that people came with were just disappearing within 1 or 2 sessions when all those thought forms were being released. But what was happening more so, once the beliefs were being released, then consciousness would come in and would see it as separate. So the identification would be broken. And in that breaking of identification, people would actually have experiences of their true being, experiences of understanding that I'm not my body and I can never die, experiences of actually, some people were experiencing things that they weren't able to experience after meditating for 20 years. So it was so quick and it was so profound, and it was healing the body, not just a healing method, but it's a method of transformation, awakening of consciousness. So then it took me probably a couple of years to experiment with many people, and I was really, my whole approach was, how can I get directly into consciousness? What are the steps? How can I help the person move quickly without spending years and years and years on an issue? And that's what I achieved to do with this method. And of course, there's areas in the body that are absolutely important to work with, which most of the time we work with in the wrong way, such as the third eye, where the vision is, such as the back of the head, the top of the head, the feet, and all the chakra system. So the whole body needs to be worked with, and this is what the method does. It works with the entire body. So, and of course, after some years, about 15 years after practicing it one-on-one, I decided that it was time to create a self-healing method. And
Yeah, I
the
was
reason,
going to ask whether this required your participation or whether you could somehow make people self-sufficient with it.
yeah, so this is exactly was the next goal for me, how
Right.
to create it in such a way that people can use it on their own without my participation, because many therapists were actually asking me to train them with the method.
Hmm.
Yoga teachers, therapists, counselors, psychologists even. And when I would look at their requests, I was cognizant that I can only train someone who has enough awareness within themselves that can recognize the difference between thought forms and consciousness and awareness. Because there's a switch that switches, that when suddenly the person's consciousness comes in, that you need to ground in the whole body. So because of the limitations, that if I had to train people, I had to train, first of all, people to become conscious. Really, there was something in her was very afraid. The first pregnancy she had two day labor, and it was very hard. The second pregnancy, she was really concerned, and there was fear. So when I worked with her with my method, what came up was that she's been a mother for many lifetimes, having many children, and she has died giving in childbirth. So there was this concern, and that's why she didn't quite want to have another child. So there was a resistance in her. And once she realized that this is the memory that was still carrying in her body, and that's why the first childbirth was difficult, because there was a resistance in her body, because she knew she had died in childbirth. And what happened the first time, immediately she went into hemorrhaging.
The 48-hour delivery was hemorrhaging.
That's right. So
Yeah.
she delivered the baby in sort of like a semi-home environment. And then the nurse left, and I noticed that she's hemorrhaging. So then they had to rush back in to take care of her, but she would have died just repeating the same pattern.
Same pattern, yeah.
And then that's why the second childbirth, when we worked with it, the first time I didn't know. The second time when I worked with her, her second delivery was just very easy, very quick, and no problems, because we went through that memory, we cleared the memory from her body, and she came to an awareness that it does not have to repeat itself.
So then it seems like there are two components. One is gaining the ability to recognize the root cause of a particular fear or problem or something, somehow tuning into that at a deeper level. And the second thing is to actually neutralize or resolve it. Can you say a bit about how both of those steps are accomplished?
Well, they're accomplished through the system, as I just described, that works with releasing those beliefs and thought forms from the body, entire body, until consciousness comes in. So it uses verbal expression, and it uses inhalation and exhalation, and it's systematic, because we need to go up and down through different parts of the body while we're working with the system through the session.
Okay, and so it's not really something that can be taught in the context of an interview. It really, one has to really sit down and do it as a focused practice and it might take an hour or something like that to do, or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and if a person wants to explore that, they can get your new book when it comes out, or they could even get in touch with you now and do it somehow.
At the moment, I'm still doing private sessions by phone or in person. Mm-hmm. And once the book is out, I'm going to be, I do offer retreats and seminars. There's one in San Francisco coming up in February. Mm-hmm. Actually, it's a Joshua Tree Retreat, 7 days. And we're going to be using the self-healing method there, along with active meditations. And I'll be doing seminars once the book comes out, and eventually training other facilitators to help others learn how to use the method. But basically, once you learn it once with me, then you can do it on your own using the book and a CD.
Good. I appreciate that. I mean, I have a respect for people that, I mean, maybe it's a personal bias because I've always been a practice kind of guy, but I have a respect for people who somehow distill some kind of practical thing that people can actually do to realize or to benefit. You know, because there are a lot of people who just kind of talk and others listen, and there seems to be a disconnect. You know, you can talk from your level of consciousness, somebody else can listen from theirs, and never the twain shall meet. But if you can come up with a very practical method to actually achieve progress toward that realization, it's great.
And it's absolutely necessary. And you know, my experience is only masters can do that, because there's a difference between a master and an enlightened teacher.
Huh.
Both could be enlightened. And the difference is that the master brings tools and the teacher teaches. Buddha is a master who brought the tool of Vipassana. And many people became enlightened because of that tool. Osho brought tools such as active meditations, and many people became enlightened. One of them is myself. Meditations, dynamic Kundalini. And my contribution is this method. And yes, I'm very grateful for you to say that, because that's absolutely true. And it's an important point for any seeker to be mindful that listening is one thing, but you actually need to do something. You cannot, people think, oh, if I go sit and listen, it will rub off. Well, it won't, because it's not going to help you discover who you are.
Yeah, you might get a bit of an energy buzz, but in terms of real deep, permanent transformation, it doesn't really seem to happen that often, you know?
It's very...
Yeah. It's an interesting distinction you draw between masters, teachers and masters. That the Sanskrit word rishi or maharishi, you know, usually means that a rishi might have all sorts of cognitions, but a maharishi is somebody who can, like Ramana Maharshi, somebody who can, you know, impart his own experience through some kind of methodology that's effective for people.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, good. I'm sure that, you know, we could spend another 2 hours going into all kinds of different chapters in your book. There's all sorts of interesting stuff about chakras and 7 bodies and all sorts of things. We may have reached the limit of people's attention span, but is there anything that you feel like, you know, we've glossed over or missed entirely that you want to just touch on before we wrap it up?
Well, I think we did pretty well. We touched on many important areas. And again, the most important thing I'd like to say, if I was to describe what kind of a teacher I was, is I'm basically a teacher of responsibility. People need to take responsibility for their own awakening. Tools are there, but you still need to use them.
It's a good point. Nobody's going to do it for you.
That's right.
Nobody's going to smack you in the forehead and you're going to realize.
Because all I can do is create an environment and teach you the tools, but then again, you have to do it. That's the case with any kind of a master, you know, quote unquote. What the master does basically knows what is it that you specifically need as an individual. Where are your blocks? So it's just sort of bringing a torch on those areas. That's all. So which is important, you know, to bring awareness to those areas, help you see what you're not seeing, but then you still need to do the work.
Yeah. Seek and you shall find. And it's good for people to hear that, because I think, you know, some people, you know, I get emails from people a lot because I do these interviews, and sometimes people sound discouraged, like, oh, you know, nothing, it's never going to happen for me. I've been at the, you know, kind of seeking for so long, and but there are teachers out there, techniques out there, and it's just a matter of finding what works for you. And usually, you know, people find if like you were saying much earlier in the interview, if a person is sincere and diligent and motivated, God is going to come to their rescue. You know, one thing is going to lead to the next, and they're going to find the thing that works for them. But you have to have that sincere interest and motivation.
Exactly, and that's exactly what's happening in my environment. Is people who are finding me are people who've done all sorts of work and listening.
This thing, but it's really a larger kind of an intelligence that's enabling this to take place.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're just playing it in the big ocean, like orchestra.
Yeah, lots of fun. Okay, so let me make a couple of concluding remarks. I've been speaking with Eliza Mata Dalian, who lives in Toronto, in Vancouver, but who gets around, does sessions still personally by phone and in person, maybe Skype, I don't know. And you also, as you said, go about and give retreats and courses or whatever you call them. You'll be doing a couple in California, it sounds like, in the near future. I'll be linking to your website from batgap.com and also linking to your book on Amazon so people can go there directly and check it out. And this is part of an ongoing series of interviews, which I've been doing for almost 3 years now, which I intend to do as long as I can speak and think, as far as I can tell. It's great fun. In fact, I'm hoping to kind of have it morph into a full-time profession, and that's why I have a donate button on my site. It sort of helps to facilitate that possibility. If people would like to be notified every time a new interview is posted, you can either subscribe to the YouTube feed or you can go to batgap.com, B-A-T-G-A-P, and there's a little subscription button where you can fill out a brief form and you'll just get an email once a week telling you when a new interview has been put up. There's also a discussion group there that springs up around each interview, sometimes gets very lively and in-depth. So if you find that points in this discussion interested you and you want to talk about them with others, go ahead and chime in there. And sometimes even the teachers whom I've interviewed have a chance to come in and answer a question or two. This also exists as an audio podcast if you'd like to listen to while you're commuting or riding your horse or hiking in the Himalayas. Both of those examples are things that people have told me they've done while listening to this. So you'll see a link there to sign up for the iPod podcast. So great, thank you, Mata. Sorry for that lengthy conclusion, but I always like to cover those points.
That's my pleasure. And one thing I'd like to mention alongside the book, there's also the No Yes meditation, which is a practical tool.
That's on your website.
That's on my website, and it's also on Amazon. So you mentioned Amazon, and you might want to link into that one as well.
I will. What is that, a book or a CD or what?
It's a CD, and it's an active meditation, and it helps to practically come through those layers as we described, let them surface and be released, and for a shift of consciousness to happen very quickly. And the CD comes with there's specific music that's been designed for the section where we say no for half an hour. And I worked with the musician to create that music so that it triggers those points and wakes up the areas that's been repressed. And then there's a period of silence and a period of different kind of music where you could say yes and dance and really feel that authentic yes within. And if I think if you haven't had experience of that, we should probably send you one so you can have an experience of it as well. And
sure.
There's a video clip that just went on YouTube yesterday with a few people talking about it. So we can send you that link as well.
Yeah, do, and I'll link to that from batgap.com. So if each time I do one of these interviews, in case somebody happens to be listening on YouTube and they haven't seen this, they have their own page on batgap.com where there's a whole bio of them and links to the various things that we want to link to. You can't really do that so easily on YouTube, but I can do it on my own blog. So those will all be there.
Okay, wonderful.
Great.
Great chatting with you.
Thank you. Very enjoyable. We'll do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
Okay. Namaste.
Stay.